Harris Faulkner on Fox News really thought she said something when she proclaimed that no one cared about the Palestinians before October 7th.
They were suffering before this war, and no one cared about them then. If your food runs out in 6 days, you were hungry before October 7th. I don't hear that coming from the protesters, the agitators, no one can. I don't even hear it from the president because they don't really care. So if he wants to fly some people over and avoid the checkpoints at the border so that we don't really know who's coming into this country, that's par for the course for him. He loves having strangers in the country that we know nothing about.
There's also zero acknowledgement, Kaylee, of what put those people in that position in the first place. It is Hamas that didn't let them flee.
And Harris, just because you and your Fox News kin weren't talking about the Palestinians doesn't mean that countless others haven't been talking about them for decades. It doesn't mean that tomes haven't been written about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. It doesn't mean that the ethics of the state of Israel and the advent of Zionism hasn't been studied and examined and debated to death in high schools and universities. Personally, I remember doing a whole mock trial in the 9th grade about Israel and Palestine, and I've been pro-Palestine ever since then. And this must have been 20 years ago, like maybe around 2003. For context, it was a post-9/11 world, and we were all still coming to terms with all of that. During the mock trial, the Israeli argument, from what I can remember, fell apart pretty quickly. Just to give you an idea of how it went for them, the Israeli side had to call Jesus Christ up to the witness stand. But this is a thing that Fox News and now Israel supporters love to do. They have to deflect away from the atrocities being committed by the IDF and by extension by the United States, because if they don't, their arguments fall apart very quickly. Their moral posturing crumbles. That's why you see pro-Israel people talking about the absolute devastation, the travesty of property damage on university campuses across the United States. But to echo Harris Faulkner, you have to wonder, do they actually care about property damage? They weren't talking about property damage until now. They weren't talking about the carpet bombs in Gaza destroying all of that property. They don't hate property damage, they just hate the perpetrators of it, who in this case are the pro-Palestine protesters. Pro-Israel people love to assert that supporters of Palestine don't actually care about the Palestinians, because if they did, they would have been talking about the Palestinians way before October 7th. First of all, people were talking about the Palestinians way before October 7th, as I've already mentioned. When October 7th happened, it's not like people didn't know why it happened. It's not like people were completely caught off guard as to why the Israelis might not have been super popular in their Middle Eastern enclave. It's not like the entire world hasn't been watching this region for decades now in anticipation of exactly what we're seeing play out today. We all knew that it was only a matter of time before something like this happened, and we all knew that Palestinian civilians would suffer for it. Second of all, Harris wants to know why no one was talking about the Palestinians before October 7th, but talking about what specifically? Her argument, and again, she's not the first one to have made this argument, is that the Palestinians have been suffering for years under the leadership of Hamas, but no one seemed to care about their suffering then. The unspoken part of that argument is that allegedly no one cared about Palestinian suffering until it became painfully obvious that the suffering was coming from the Israelis. Since Hamas was able to oppress and kill Palestinians and get away with it, why can't the Israelis do the same thing on a much, much larger scale and also get away with it? It must be because all of these pro-Palestine advocates are actually anti-Semitic. They don't care about the Palestinians. They hate not just Israel, not just Zionists, but all Jewish people. That is their actual insane argument.
One of the things I learned on a bus trip from El Dorado, Kansas to San Angelo, Texas for the national track meet is I learned a lot about folks that were a different skin color than I was. And it was the first time in my life I was in the minority. A long, long bus ride. But what I learned is that the people that are being discriminated against get to define what's insulting and what's not insulting. That we don't get to define that. So if my Jewish friends feel insulted when the term Zion is used, which it is, it's another term for being pro-Israel in a lot of ways as well. So I wouldn't be mincing differences there.
Third, Harris says that it only took days for the Palestinian people to begin suffering and starving once the IDF cut off Palestinian supply lines. She's trying to say that the IDF blockading ports and shooting at aid workers wasn't the actual reason the Palestinians were starving and drinking dirty water in the days following October 7th. It was actually Hamas's fault because Hamas should have built a better surplus and supply infrastructure to better withstand a foreign government's attempt to starve and kill the Palestinian people. The ignorance of a statement like that is unfathomable. She's saying this from a high-rise office building in New York City. She doesn't understand instability. She doesn't seem to be able to empathize with it, or at least she knows that her audience won't be able or willing to do so. Palestine has been the apex of political instability and uncertainty for decades at least, and most of that is due to foreign intervention in the region. Hamas didn't pop up until 1987. The Balfour Declaration happened a full 70 years before that in 1917. Hamas was an imperfect and desperate attempt to fight back against, ironically, a Goliath. Of course, Hamas is anti-Israel. The State of Israel is and was Palestine's Goliath. If you look at other radicalized people or groups, past or present, foreign or domestic, you will notice a pattern. Radicalization happens in response to hopelessness. It is an attempt to take back some power that has been lost. Without Israel, there would likely be no Hamas. I'm not defending their charter or their methods, and I'm not saying that they were good to the Palestinian people, but I am saying that we need to understand these groups if we want to understand the overall conflict. I am saying that it's disingenuous to condemn the Palestinian people for putting Hamas in power in the first place. It was either Hamas or Israel. Additionally, I find it very arrogant for Americans to judge other nations for their inability to just do government better when we barely have our own democracy on lock. Our people aren't exactly the happiest or the most prosperous in the world, and our infrastructure is crumbling. Not only that, but no one messes with us. We're not dealing with overt foreign intervention. No one is actively trying to displace us. No one is obstructing our growth, imprisoning our people without cause or due process, or driving tanks into our neighborhoods. Moreover, the audacity of an American to criticize the Palestinian government is particularly obnoxious when our government is a big part of the reason as to why Palestine is so unstable. Americans love a good villain origin story. It's an entire genre of film. We watch Maleficent and Cruella, and we love those movies. Wicked is one of the biggest shows that's ever been on Broadway, and now they're making a movie about it. And we love those stories because these people, who we were told were mean and evil just because they're mean and evil, suddenly became human to us once we understood how and why they came to be the villains in our stories. Maleficent was heartbroken and lonely. Cruella witnessed her adopted mother get murdered by Dalmatians. That was weird. The Wicked Witch of the West, she was bullied in school for being green. We like these stories because they complicate and challenge the narratives that we have been fed our whole lives. They reveal complexity within individuals and encourage empathy and compassion where once there was none. Ignorance encourages separation, and ignorance of the world and its people is part of what has led us to where we are today. All right, that's it for me. If you got something out of this, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and check out my podcast, Modern Context. Thanks.